Aphorisms 69 to 77 of Book 1 of the New Organon. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Alan Shaw. The New Organon by Francis Bacon. Translated by James Spedding, Robert Leslie Ellis, and Douglas Denon Heath. Aphorisms 69 to 77 of Book 1. Aphorism 69. But vicious demonstrations are as the strongholds and defenses of idols. And those we have in logic do little else than make the world the bondslave of human thought, and human thought the bondslave of words. Demonstrations truly are in effect the philosophies themselves and the sciences. For such as they are, well or ill established, such are the systems of philosophy and the contemplations which follow. Now in the whole of the process which leads from the sense and objects to axioms and conclusions, the demonstrations which we use are deceptive and incompetent. This process consists of 4 parts, and has as many faults. In the first place, the impressions of the sense itself are faulty, for the sense both fails us and deceives us, but its shortcomings are to be supplied, and its deceptions to be corrected. Secondly, notions are ill drawn from the impressions of the senses, and are indefinite and confused, whereas they should be definite and distinctly bounded. Thirdly, the induction is amiss which infers the principles of sciences by simple enumeration, and does not, as it ought, employ exclusions and solutions or separations of nature. Lastly, that method of discovery and proof according to which the most general principles are first established, and then intermediate axioms are tried and proved by them, is the parent of error and the curse of all science. Of these things, however, which now I do but touch upon, I will speak more largely when, having performed these expiations and purgings of the mind, I come to set forth the true way for the interpretation of nature. Aphorism 70. But the best demonstration by far is experience, if it go not beyond the actual experiment. For if it be transferred to other cases which are deemed similar, unless such transfer be made by a just and orderly process, it is a fallacious thing. But the manner of making experiments which men now use is blind and stupid, and therefore, wandering and straying as they do with no settled course, and taking counsel only from things as they fall out, they fetch a wide circuit and meet with many matters, but make little progress, and sometimes are full of hope, sometimes are distracted, and always find that there is something beyond to be sought. For it generally happens that men make their trials carelessly, and as it were in play, slightly varying experiments already known, and, if the thing does not answer, growing weary and abandoning the attempt. And even if they apply themselves to experiments more seriously and earnestly and laboriously, still they spend their labor in working out some one experiment, as Gilbert with the magnet, and the chemist with gold, a course of proceeding not less unskilful in the design than small in the attempt. For no one successfully investigates the nature of a thing in the thing itself. The inquiry must be enlarged so as to become more general. And even when they seek to adduce some science or theory from their experiments, they nevertheless almost always turn aside with over-hasty and unseasonable eagerness to practice, not only for the sake of the uses and fruits of the practice, but from impatience to obtain in the shape of some new work an assurance for themselves that it is worth their while to go on, and also to show themselves off to the world, and so raise the credit of the business in which they are engaged. Thus, like Atalanta, they go aside to pick up the golden apple, but meanwhile they interrupt their course and let the victory escape them. But in the true course of experience, and in carrying it on to the effecting of new works, the divine wisdom and order must be our pattern. Now God, on the first day of creation, created light only, giving to that work an entire day, in which no material substance was created. So must we likewise from experience of every kind first endeavor to discover true causes and axioms, and seek for experiments of light, not for experiments of fruit. For axioms rightly discovered and established supply practice with its instruments, not one by one, but in clusters, and draw after them trains and troops of works. Of the paths, however, of experience, which no less than the paths of judgment are impeded and beset, I will speak hereafter. Here I have only mentioned ordinary experimental research as a bad kind of demonstration. But now the order of the matter in hand leads me to add something both as to those signs which I lately mentioned, signs that the systems of philosophy and contemplation in use are in a bad condition, and also as to the causes of what seems at first so strange and incredible. For a knowledge of the signs prepares assent, an explanation of the causes removes the marvel, which two things will do much to render the extirpation of idols from the understanding more easy and gentle. Aphorism 71. The sciences which we possess come for the most part from the Greeks. For what has been added by Roman, Arabic, or later writers is not much, nor of much importance. And whatever it is built on the foundation of Greek discoveries. Now the wisdom of the Greeks was professorial and much given to disputations, a kind of wisdom most adverse to the inquisition of truth. Thus that name of sophists, which by those who would be thought philosophers was in contempt cast back upon and so transferred to the ancient rhetoricians, Gorgias, Protagoras, Hippias, Polus, does indeed suit the entire class, Plato, Aristotle, Zeno, Epicurus, Theophrastus, and their successors, Chrysippus, Carneades, and the rest. There was this difference only, that the former class was wandering and mercenary, going about from town to town putting up their wisdom to sale, and taking a price for it, while the latter was more pompous and dignified, as composed of men who had fixed abodes, and who opened schools and taught their philosophy without reward. Still, both sorts, though in other respects unequal, were professorial. Both turned the matter into disputations, and set up and battled for philosophical sects and heresies, so that their doctrines were for the most part, as Dionysius not unaptly rallied Plato, the talk of idle old men to ignorant youth. But the elder of the Greek philosophers, Empedocles, Anaxagoras, Leucippus, Democritus, Parmenides, Heraclitus, Xenophanes, Philolaus, and the rest, I omit Pythagoras as a mystic, did not, so far as we know, open schools, but more silently and severely and simply, that is, with less affectation and parade, betook themselves to the inquisition of truth. And therefore they were, in my judgment, more successful, only that their works were, in the course of time, obscured by those slighter persons who had much more which suits and pleases the capacity and taste of the vulgar. Time, like a river, bringing down to us things which are light and puffed up, but letting weighty matters sink. Still, even they were not altogether free from the failing of their nation, but leaned too much to the ambition and vanity of founding a sect, and catching popular applause. But the inquisition of truth must be despaired of when it turns aside to trifles of this kind. Nor should we omit that judgment, or rather divination, which was given concerning the Greeks by the Egyptian priest, that they were always boys, without antiquity of knowledge or knowledge of antiquity. Assuredly, they have that which is characteristic of boys. They are prompt to prattle, but cannot generate, for their wisdom abounds in words but is barren of works. And therefore the signs which are taken from the origin and birthplace of the received philosophy are not good. Aphorism 72. Nor does the character of the time and age yield much better signs than the character of the country and nation. For at that period there was but a narrow and meagre knowledge either of time or place, which is the worst thing that can be, especially for those who rest all on experience. For they had no history worthy to be called history that went back 1,000 years, but only fables and rumors of antiquity. And of the regions and districts of the world they knew but a small portion, giving indiscriminately the name of Scythians to all in the north, of Celts to all in the west, knowing nothing of Africa beyond the hither side of Ethiopia, of Asia beyond the Ganges. Much less were they acquainted with the provinces of the New World, even by hearsay or any well-founded rumor. Nay, a multitude of climates and zones, wherein innumerable nations breathe and live, were pronounced by them to be uninhabitable. And the travels of Democritus, Plato, and Pythagoras, which were rather suburban excursions than distant journeys, were talked of as something great. In our times, on the other hand, both many parts of the New World and the limits on every side of the Old World are known, and our stock of experience has increased to an infinite amount. Wherefore if, like astrologers, we draw signs from the season of their nativity or birth, nothing great can be predicted of those systems of philosophy. Aphorism 73. Of all signs, there is none more certain or more noble than that taken from fruits. For fruits and works are, as it were, sponsors and sureties for the truth of philosophies. Now, from all these systems of the Greeks, and the ramifications through particular sciences, there can hardly, after the lapse of so many years, be adduced a single experiment which tends to relieve and benefit the condition of man, and which can with truth be referred to the speculations and theories of philosophy. And Celsus ingenuously and wisely owns as much when he tells us that the experimental part of medicine was first discovered, and that afterwards men philosophized about it, and hunted for and assigned causes, and not by an inverse process that philosophy and the knowledge of causes led to the discovery and development of the experimental part. and therefore it was not strange that among the Egyptians, who rewarded inventors with divine honors and sacred rites, there were more images of brutes than of men, inasmuch as brutes by their natural instinct have produced many discoveries, whereas men by discussion and the conclusions of reason have given birth to few or none. Some little has indeed been produced by the industry of chemists, but it has been produced accidentally and in passing, or else by a kind of variation of experiments, such as mechanics use, and not by any art or theory. For the theory which they have devised rather confuses the experiments than aids them. They, too, who have busied themselves with natural magic, as they call it, have but few discoveries to show, and those trifling and imposture-like. Wherefore, as in religion we are warned to show our faith by works, so in philosophy by the same rule the system should be judged of by its fruits, and pronounced frivolous if it be barren, more especially if, in place of fruits of grape and olive, it bear thorns and briars of dispute and contention. Aphorism 74. Signs also are to be drawn from the increase and progress of systems and sciences. For what is founded on nature grows and increases, while what is founded on opinion varies, but increases not. If, therefore, those doctrines had not plainly been like a plant torn up from its roots, but had remained attached to the womb of nature and continued to draw nourishment from her, that could never have come to pass which we have seen now for twice 1,000 years, namely, that the sciences stand where they did, and remain almost in the same condition, receiving no noticeable increase, but on the contrary, thriving most under their first founder, and then declining. Whereas in the mechanical arts, which are founded on nature in the light of experience, we see the contrary happen. For these, as long as they are popular, are continually thriving and growing, as having in them a breath of life, at the first rude, then convenient, afterwards adorned, and at all times advancing. Aphorism 75. There is still another sign remaining, if sign it can be called, when it is rather testimony, nay, of all testimony the most valid. I mean the confession of the very authorities whom men now follow. For even they who lay down the law on all things so confidently, do still in their more sober moods fall to complaints of the subtlety of nature, the obscurity of things, and the weakness of the human mind. Now, if this were all they did, some, perhaps, of a timid disposition might be deterred from further search, while others of a more ardent and hopeful spirit might be whetted and incited to go on farther. But not content to speak for themselves, whatever is beyond their own or their master's knowledge or reach, they set down as beyond the bounds of possibility, and pronounce, as if on the authority of their art, that it cannot be known or done, thus most presumptuously and invidiously turning the weakness of their own discoveries into a calumny of nature herself and the despair of the rest of the world. Hence the school of the New Academy, which held a catalepsia as a tenet, and doomed men to perpetual darkness. Hence the opinion that forms or true differences of things, which are in fact laws of pure act, are past finding out and beyond the reach of man. Hence, too, those opinions in the department of action and operation, as that the heat of the sun and of fire are quite different in kind, lest men should imagine that by the operations of fire anything like the works of nature can be educed and formed. Hence the notion that composition only is the work of man, and mixture of none but nature, lest men should expect from art some power of generating or transforming natural bodies. By this sign, therefore, men will easily take warning not to mix up their fortunes and labors with dogmas not only despaired of, but dedicated to despair. Aphorism 76. Neither is this other sign to be omitted, that formerly there existed among philosophers such great disagreement, and such diversities in the schools themselves, a fact which sufficiently shows that the road from the senses to the understanding was not skilfully laid out. When the same groundwork of philosophy, the nature of things to wit, was torn and split up into such vague and multifarious errors, and although in these times disagreements and diversities of opinion on first principles and entire systems are for the most part extinguished, still on parts of philosophy there remain innumerable questions and disputes, so that it plainly appears that neither in the systems themselves nor in the modes of demonstration is there anything certain or sound. Aphorism 77. And as for the general opinion that in the philosophy of Aristotle, at any rate, there is great agreement, since after its publication the systems of older philosophers died away, while in the times which followed nothing better was found, so that it seems to have been so well laid and established as to have drawn both ages in its train, I answer in the first place, that the common notion of the falling off of the old systems upon the publication of Aristotle's works is a false one. For long afterwards, down even to the times of Cicero and subsequent ages, the works of the old philosophers still remained. But in the times which followed, when on the inundation of barbarians into the Roman Empire human learning had suffered shipwreck, then the systems of Aristotle and Plato, like planks of lighter and less solid material, floated on the waves of time and were preserved. Upon the point of consent also men are deceived, if the matter be looked into more keenly. For true consent is that which consists in the coincidence of free judgments, after due examination. But far the greater number of those who have assented to the philosophy of Aristotle have addicted themselves thereto from prejudgment and upon the authority of others, so that it is a following and going along together rather than consent. But even if it had been a real and widespread consent, still so little ought consent to be deemed a sure and solid confirmation, that it is in fact a strong presumption the other way. For the worst of all auguries is from consent in matters intellectual, divinity excepted, and politics where there is right of vote. For nothing pleases the many unless it strikes the imagination, or binds the understanding with the bands of common notions, as I have already said. We may very well transfer, therefore, from moral to intellectual matters the saying of Phocion, that if the multitude assent and applaud, men ought immediately to examine themselves as to what blunder or fault they may have committed. This sign, therefore, is one of the most unfavorable, and so much for this point, namely, that the signs of truth and soundness in the received systems and sciences are not good, whether they be drawn from their origin, or from their fruits, or from their progress, or from the confessions of their founders, or from general consent. End of Aphorisms 69 to 77 of Book 1. Recording by Alan Shaw.